Lincoln Riley can make USC a Big Ten contender. Just not right now. There are too many hurdles to jump over for a one-season turnaround, because when he came in to USC ahead of the 2022 season, left Oklahoma for the Alamo Bowl against Oregon, and they won that game, but who cares? Lincoln Riley's gone and all that. He comes in 1 year, brings in a bunch of transfers, including but not limited to Caleb Williams, who wins the Heisman Trophy. They're in the Pac-12 championship game. They lose that. They lose to Tulane, but you think, okay, well, this has just established a really high floor, and certainly things are going to keep going up, and that hasn't happened. They have regressed in each of the subsequent years, and this year, I thought they would be better. They went 6-6. I had them at 9-3. Why? Because of D'Anton Lynn, their defensive coordinator, who was every bit as good as I thought he would be. USC's points per game this year went from 34 just over in 2023 to just over 24. A one-season jump like that, they brought in some transfers. Guys like Kamari Ramsey, who were playmakers on the back end of the defense. He just went across town from UCLA. I think the Trojans have brought in some quality transfers. They've also had a lot of guys leave. I'll touch on that more in a moment. But D'Anton Lynn wasn't the problem. My faith in him was absolutely rewarded. The numbers bore that out. It was Lincoln Riley's offense that didn't live up to the billing. That was just something that we have not really seen from a Lincoln Riley coached offense. The problem that USC ran into and where they need to build toward, they are still incredibly capable of recruiting at a higher level than they do, and being a better overall football program, and being a Big Ten championship contender year in and year out. The potential for a team in Los Angeles, the team in Los Angeles, is still there. The problem is USC has not built their high school recruiting classes in the way that they need to. There are plenty of talented guys that have rolled through. A lot of them have since transferred out, and I can tell you from people involved in covering USC football, they're not all that upset about the 21 outgoing transfers, because it's easy to look at that disparity and say there's, a trade deficit of sorts with the portal. USC has brought in 11 transfers. They have had 21 go out. Oh my gosh, that's just it's in a state of free fall. It'd be really easy for me to come on here and disingenuously paint that picture, but that's not how I roll. So the guys who they have had leave, they're not upset about it. Doesn't mean they wanted every single guy to go. There are a couple I'm sure they look at and go, boy, I wish we could have kept him around. But they have again brought in a top 20 transfer portal class, and I think they have been very smart with a couple of their additions. But the way that USC was built in 2022 was Caleb Williams is amazing, and he's just going to go make all these plays. And then that ran out of magic for the 23 season. They took a step back. They didn't have him there at all, and all of a sudden it was a problem. Here's where USC needs to get to. Here's where Lincoln Riley needs to get to for USC to become a Big Ten championship contender again. He needs to remind himself how his offenses worked at Oklahoma. Yes, they created explosive plays in the passing game. Yes, he's been a quarterback whisperer, and I could not have foreseen after the LSU game that Miller Moss would be benched by the end of the year. Didn't ever feel like he was the problem necessarily, but he also wasn't the solution in the way I and others thought he might be. But this past season, USC ran for 200 or more yards one time. They had 197 against Notre Dame, the national runners-up, who, what do you know, they were competitive and down one score, driving for the tie, and Jaden Mayava threw a pick six. He's likely the starter next year for the Trojans, has got plenty of potential. But what you have at quarterback doesn't matter if the trench play doesn't improve on both sides of the ball. And that's where USC's focus needs to be on the recruiting trail. And there was a hot moment where they had a couple of big-time defensive line commits who since decommitted and went elsewhere towards mostly towards the SEC. But what I appreciated when that happened was, look, I don't know if they're going to keep Justice Terry committed. They didn't, a 5-star defensive lineman. But I appreciate that USC's going after those caliber of guys, or that caliber of guys again. Because That's where USC has been severely lacking. In Lincoln Riley's last year at Oklahoma, 2021, the final game they ran for a bunch of yards with, Lincoln Riley's scheme players and all that sort of stuff against Oregon in the Alamo Bowl, so you can take that with a grain of salt. But there were 6 games that season in which Oklahoma ran for at least 200 yards on the ground. 6 of them. 6. That's about half the season. They played 13 games that year. They had 2 games where they eclipsed 300 yards on the ground, including the Texas game, the Red River Shootout. In 2021, Lincoln Riley went for over 300 on the ground. How about that? That's an unfathomable thought for USC in the last couple of years because they have focused very heavily on getting skill position guys, a lot of whom have transferred out. Others, like Mekhi Lemon, are still around. Tremendously talented dude. And I will never look at a program, no matter what you are or what you need to be, and say, well, if you have a chance to go and get 2 4-star offensive linemen or Mekhi Lemon, well, you should just turn down Lemon every time. No, he's an incredibly talented wide receiver. Was USC's best and most consistent over this past year. But when I look at USC, they are missing in the trenches on the defensive line and in the trenches on the offensive line. They don't even feel like they're close to where their ceiling is. They're at like a 2 out of 10 in the trenches compared to what they are fully capable of. Well, now they go out in this 25 cycle and they're willing to do whatever it took to get Jakeem Stewart, who's a highly rated defensive lineman, that reclassified from the 26 cycle. Oregon was after him. Oregon recruits defensive linemen as well as anyone in the country over the last couple of cycles. And USC went to get him, I can tell you. In Eugene, that was kind of a head-turning moment from a fan standpoint where people were going, he went to USC? Really? Defensive guy? Yeah. Make the investment. Make the commitment. Go out and get those sorts of guys. They brought in a couple of transfer defensive linemen from the SEC this offseason in Keyshawn Silver and Jamal Jarrett. That's great. But we know the bulk of the roster is built through high school recruiting. They brought in a couple interior offensive line transfers via the portal that, according to 24/7 Sports, grade as 4-star guys. That's great. That's great. Long term, though, I want to see USC beef up their recruiting on the offensive line and along the defensive line. I want in a couple years, if they're going to be a Big Ten championship contender, or for me to see them that way, I want them to have stacked a couple of classes where you're bringing in 4- and 5-star offensive defensive linemen. They develop for a year or two, or maybe some guys are ready to play early. And then by the 26 or 27 season, you look at it and go, yeah, a lot of homegrown recruits of sorts. They won't all be from USC's backyard, of course, but a lot of guys that were recruited and developed at USC with a priority on we have to be better up front. I mentioned the offensive line struggles. In USC's 6 losses this past year, here are the rushing yards that they allowed. Only one time was it under 100 yards. 290, that was against Michigan. 193, 118, 56, 113, 258. There's an anomaly in there, but over 250 yards twice, another over 190. You are the University of Southern California. Should not happen. So that's where I want them to get to, because in the long run, I don't worry about Lincoln Riley not being able to coach a quarterback or recruit good wide receivers or have capable running backs. They can do all that. But if they're running behind an offensive line that's getting pushed around, or if the defensive line is allowing 290 yards in a game on the ground against Michigan, even against a great running team, shouldn't happen. You hold them to 220 in that game and USC wins. And that's not even a good day. So that's where the focus has to be. That is how Lincoln Riley gets USC back to being back to being a conference championship contender. Now a member of the Big Ten, just as we all anticipated 3 years ago. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.